The blizzard had buried Pinewood, Colorado under 6 inches of silence. Mason Reynolds and his German Shepherd Ranger trudged through the pre-dawn darkness at 5:30, their breath ghosting in the frozen air. The familiar weight of solitude pressed against Mason's shoulders, a feeling he had grown accustomed to in the 3 years since Emily's death. At 42, he found comfort in these early morning rituals when the world belonged only to him and his rescued dog. Ranger suddenly erupted into frantic barking, clawing at the snow near Elk Creek Bridge with desperate intensity. The dog's behavior that shifted from his usual calm demeanor to something Mason hadn't witnessed before. For not panic exactly, but urgent purpose. Mason's heart hammered as he brushed away the white powder. A police cruiser lay crushed and overturned, blood painting the pristine snow in crimson streaks. Inside the twisted metal, a female officer hung motionless from her seatbelt, her face pale as the snow itself, lips blue with cold. "Officer Mitchell, badge number 247, she whispered through chattering teeth before her eyes rolled back. But as Mason reached to pull her free, Ranger froze mid-bark, his entire body going rigid as stone. The dog's amber eyes locked onto the dark tree line behind them, hackles rising, a low growl rumbling from his throat. In that deadly silence, Mason realized they weren't alone. His hands shook as he yanked open the crumpled driver's door, metal shrieking against metal. The woman's uniform was soaked through her badge, catching what little moonlight filtered through the storm clouds. Her breathing came in shallow puffs that barely fogged the frigid air. Ranger circled them now, ears flattened, nose working frantically as if picking up scents that didn't belong in their quiet morning routine. Mason had carried wounded comrades before, but his hands felt clumsy in the thick gloves as he worked to unbuckle her seatbelt. "Can you hear me?" No response, just the soft whisper of snowflakes hitting the ground, and Ranger's continued low growling. The dog kept glancing between the unconscious officer and the woods, his body language screaming danger in a way that made Mason's military instincts flare to life. Something was wrong beyond the obvious crash. The hairs on Mason's neck prickled as he lifted the woman's limp form, her head lolling against his shoulder. The trek back to his house felt endless, his boots sinking deep into the fresh powder with each step. Ranger led the way, constantly checking behind them, his black nose cutting through the air like a radar dish. The woman's breathing grew more labored against Mason's chest, and he quickened his pace despite the burning in his lungs. His small ranch house appeared through the swirling white like a beacon, windows glowing warm yellow against the pre-dawn darkness. Behind them, the forest remained ominously still. Inside, Mason laid the officer on his worn leather couch near the stone fireplace, its embers still glowing from the night before. Ranger positioned himself by the front window, alert and tense, occasionally whining softly. Mason grabbed towels from the bathroom, his movements automatic from years of single parenthood and crisis management. The woman's skin felt like ice beneath his fingers as he checked for other injuries. A nasty gash on her forehead had stopped bleeding, but dried blood matted her dark hair. Her name tag read S. Mitchell in bold black letters. 7-year-old Ethan appeared at the top of the stairs, rubbing sleep from his eyes. His superhero pajamas hung loose on his small frame, and his sandy hair stuck up at odd angles. "Dad, what's happening? Why is Ranger acting weird?" The boy's voice carried that particular note of worry that always made Mason's chest tighten. Ranger glanced at Ethan but didn't leave his post by the window tail, rigid and still. The dog's unusual behavior wasn't lost on the observant child, who had grown used to Ranger's normally gentle demeanor around the house. "There was an accident, buddy. This lady needs help." Mason kept his voice steady as he wrapped the woman in his heaviest blanket, the one Emily had crocheted during her final winter. The officer stirred slightly, eyelids fluttering, and Mason felt a surge of relief. Her lips moved soundlessly before her eyes opened. Unfocused and glazed, she tried to sit up, immediately wincing and pressing a hand to her head. Ranger abandoned his window post and approached the couch, sniffing carefully at the woman's outstretched hand. "Easy there. You were in a car accident." Mason's voice carried the gentle authority he'd learned from years of calming frightened patients in combat and scared children in his own home. The woman's eyes gradually focused on his face, then swept around the unfamiliar room. She took in the rustic furniture, the family photos on the mantel, Ethan hovering uncertainly in the doorway. Ranger sat beside the couch now, head tilted in an almost protective posture that struck Mason as odd for a dog who usually cowered at the sight of uniforms. Mason had rescued Ranger from the shelter 18 months ago. The staff had warned him that BI had trauma around loud noises and uniforms, particularly police uniforms. "I'm Sarah," she said finally, voice barely above a whisper. "Officer Sarah Mitchell, badge number 247. She repeated the information like a mantra, as if afraid she might forget. Mason noticed she avoided looking directly at Ranger, though the dog's presence seemed to calm her in some indefinable way. Her hands trembled as she pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows and sending spirals of snow against the glass. Mason moved to the kitchen muscle memory, guiding him through the familiar routine of brewing coffee and heating milk for hot chocolate. Through the open doorway, he watched Sarah's interaction with Ethan, who had crept closer despite his father's unspoken warning to keep his distance. The boy's natural curiosity trumped caution, as it often did. Ranger remained at the woman's side, occasionally glancing toward the windows with that same alert tension. The dog's behavior nagged at Mason's consciousness like a persistent itch he couldn't scratch. "You have a gun," Ethan observed with the blunt honesty of childhood, pointing at Sarah's service weapon. She looked down at her holster as if surprised to find it there, her expression flickering between confusion and something Mason couldn't quite identify. Fear, maybe, or recognition. Ranger's ears pricked forward at Ethan's words, and the dog's eyes tracked between the weapon and Sarah's face with an intelligence that seemed almost human. The moment stretched uncomfortably before Sarah managed a weak smile. "It's part of my job, sweetheart, like how your dad probably has tools for fixing cars." Her voice grew stronger, more controlled, but Mason caught the slight tremor underneath. She accepted the mug of hot chocolate Mason offered, wrapping both hands around it as if anchoring herself to something solid. Steam rose from the liquid, momentarily fogging the lower part of her face. Ranger settled at her feet with a soft sigh, finally relaxing for the first time since they'd found her. The radio crackled from Sarah's duty belt, making all of them jump. Dispatch was calling for units to respond to various incidents around the county, the tiny voice echoing strangely in the warm living room. Sarah made no move to respond, staring into her hot chocolate with an expression Mason recognized from his own mirror during the darkest days after Emily's death. Ranger's head snapped up at the radio sounds, and that familiar trembling started in his hindquarters. The dog had never responded well to official radio chatter or sirens. "Shouldn't you check in with them?" Mason asked carefully, settling into the armchair across from her. Sarah's grip tightened on the mug, her knuckles whitening. She shook her head slowly, dark hair falling across her face like a curtain. Ethan climbed onto the arm of Mason's chair, sensing the tension in the room with a child's uncanny ability to read adult emotions. The fire crackled in the grate, the only sound besides the wind and the occasional squawk from Sarah's radio. "I need to think first, figure out what happened. The roads are too dangerous anyway. No point in more people getting hurt trying to reach me." She looked directly at Ranger for the first time, and the dog's tail thumped once against the floor. Something passed between them, some recognition that made Mason's instincts prickle again. The woman who'd nearly died in the snow was studying his rescue dog with the intensity of someone seeing a ghost. Morning light began filtering through the storm clouds, casting the snow-covered landscape in shades of blue and gray. The blizzard showed no signs of letting up, and the radio reported multiple accidents and road closures throughout the county. Mason found himself studying Sarah's profile as she stared out the window, noting the way her hand unconsciously moved to Ranger's head when the dog leaned against her legs. For an animal that typically shied away from strangers in uniform, Ranger's behavior struck him as completely out of character. Ranger doesn't usually warm up to people so quickly. Sarah's hand stilled on the dog's fur, and she turned to look at him with eyes that seemed older than her years. There was knowledge there and pain and something else that made Mason think of soldiers who'd seen too much combat. Ranger whined softly and pushed his muzzle into her palm, a gesture of comfort the dog had only ever shown to Mason and Ethan during their worst moments. "I had a dog like him once. Same breed, same coloring." Sarah's voice carried a weight that spoke of loss and grief barely held in check. "2 years ago, he was killed." The last words came out barely audible, and Ranger's whine grew more insistent. Mason felt pieces of a puzzle shifting in his mind, connections forming that didn't quite make sense yet. The timeline felt wrong somehow, but he couldn't put his finger on why. Ethan slipped down from the chair arm and approached Sarah with the fearless curiosity of childhood. What was his name? Your dog. Ranger's tail wagged as the boy settled cross-legged on the floor beside them, creating a small circle of warmth near the fireplace. Sarah's smile was genuine, this time touched with sadness, but real. She reached out to ruffle Ethan's hair with her free hand while continuing to pet Ranger with the other. His name was... The hesitation was so brief, Mason almost missed it, but Ranger's ears flicked backward for an instant. Bruno, he was a good boy, loyal, protective. Her voice grew distant, and Mason noticed she was looking at Ranger rather than at Ethan while she spoke. The dog's behavior grew more animated, tail wagging faster, and he pressed closer against her legs as if trying to offer comfort for a loss that seemed to resonate in his bones. The wind died down outside, leaving an eerie silence broken only by the occasional crack of settling snow and the soft hiss of the fire. Mason's phone buzzed with a text message, probably someone from town checking on him, and Ethan given the severity of the storm. He ignored it, caught up in watching the interaction between his rescued dog and this mysterious woman who'd literally crashed into their quiet morning. Ranger was behaving like he'd found something precious that he'd thought was lost forever. Mason excused himself to check on the generator and bring in more firewood, needing a moment to process the strangeness of the situation. Outside on the covered porch, he took a deep breath of the frigid air, letting it clear his head. The hairs on the back of his neck still stood at attention the way they used to before ambushes in Afghanistan. There are two types of damage in this world, he thought, watching the snowfall broken beyond repair and waiting to be rebuilt. That dog's just waiting for the right hands. The question was, were Sarah Mitchell's the right hands, and why did Ranger seem to think so? Back inside, Mason found Sarah standing by the mantelpiece studying the family photos. Her posture had changed, more alert, more professional, though pain still etched lines around her eyes. She'd moved to a position that gave her clear views of both the front door and the windows. Not a coincidence. Mason recognized the tactical awareness from his military days. Your wife, Sarah gestured to a photo of Emily radiant in summer light, despite the chemotherapy that had thinned her hair. Emily, cancer 3 years ago. Mason had learned to say it simply without the weight of explanation. People either understood or they didn't. Sarah nodded the gesture, conveying more understanding than words could. Ethan has her smile. Ranger had positioned himself near the front door, now ears perked forward, listening to something beyond Mason's human hearing range. The dog's posture communicated alertness rather than fear. How long have you had him? Sarah's question seemed casual, but Mason caught the undertone of significance. About 18 months, rescued from the county shelter. They said he was surrendered after his owner died, but he had some issues. Scared of uniforms, especially police, hates sirens and radios. Mason gestured toward her police radio, which Ranger had been eyeing warily. Which makes his behavior around you pretty interesting. Sarah's eyes darted away, then back to Mason with new resolve. Some animals just know when they're safe. And are we safe? The question hung between them, heavier than the storm clouds outside. Before she could answer, Ranger's head snapped toward the window, a low growl building in his chest. The sound was different from his earlier warnings, more focused, more certain. Seconds later, the crunch of tires on snow reached Mason's ears. Mason moved to the window, staying to the side to avoid being silhouetted. The county sheriff's SUV was pulling into his long driveway, chains on its tires cutting through the fresh snow. Ranger's growling intensified, and Sarah's face drained of what little color it had regained. That's Sheriff Ramirez, Mason said, recognizing the vehicle. Probably checking on the crash site. I should know. Sarah's voice was barely audible, but the intensity stopped Mason cold. Please, I can't. Not yet. The fear in her eyes wasn't the kind that came from normal anxiety about facing one's boss after an accident. This was raw, primal, the fear of prey in the presence of a predator. Ranger positioned himself between Sarah and the door, his hackles raised, a protective barrier of muscle and fur. Mason's mind raced through possibilities, none of them good. A corrupted officer on the run, a domestic situation with a superior, or something deeper, more dangerous. Ethan appeared in the kitchen doorway, sensing the tension. Dad, who's here? Sheriff Ramirez, just checking on us, buddy. Why don't you go upstairs for a bit? Mason kept his voice casual, but Ethan had always been perceptive. Is it because of the police lady? Is she in trouble? Sarah knelt down to Ethan's level, wincing slightly at the movement. No one's in trouble, sweetheart. But sometimes the people meant to protect us are the ones we need protection from. Her voice was gentle, but the words sent a chill through Mason that had nothing to do with the blizzard. The sheriff's boots on the porch steps sounded like a countdown. Mason made a split-second decision, the kind he'd made under fire in Kandahar, when lives hung in the balance. "Kitchen, both of you, keep Ranger quiet." He gestured toward the back of the house. "Ethan, remember our quiet game?" The boy nodded solemnly. They'd practiced it after Emily died when Mason couldn't bear well-meaning visitors. The rules were simple, absolute silence, no matter what. Sarah hesitated, her hand going instinctively to her service weapon. Mason shook his head slightly. Escalation would only make things worse, whatever things were. Understanding flashed in her eyes, and she followed Ethan toward the kitchen, one hand on Ranger's collar. The knock came 3 sharp raps that seemed to echo through the house. Mason counted to 5, composing his features into a mask of ordinary surprise, then opened the door. Sheriff Dominic Ramirez stood on the porch, snowflakes gathering on the brim of his hat. At 50, Ramirez carried the authority of his position with the ease of a man accustomed to being obeyed. His weathered face broke into a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Mason, good to see you weathering the storm all right. Got worried when I saw lights on this far out." The sheriff stomped snow from his boots, but didn't wait for an invitation before stepping inside. "Just checking on folks along the creek. Roads are hell, but that's what the taxpayers pay me for, right?" Ramirez's laugh was practiced, the kind that invited others to join in. Mason managed a polite smile. "We're doing fine. Generators running smooth, plenty of supplies." Mason deliberately kept his posture relaxed, though every nerve ending was firing danger signals. "Coffee?" "Wouldn't say no." Ramirez removed his hat but kept his coat on, a subtle sign he wasn't planning to stay long. His eyes scanned the room, professionally casual but missing nothing. They lingered on the blanket still draped over the couch, the 2 mugs on the coffee table. From the kitchen came the softest sound, the click of Ranger's nails on the tile floor. Ramirez's head turned slightly, attention sharpening. "That rescue dog of yours still giving you trouble? Thompson over at the hardware store said he nearly took a chunk out of the UPS guy last month." Mason shrugged, moving toward the kitchen to draw the sheriff's attention away from the evidence of Sarah's presence. "He's protective, that's all. Getting better with strangers." Ramirez followed, and Mason felt sweat prickling under his collar despite the chill. "Heard about a cruiser that went off near Elk Creek Bridge. You see anything on your morning walks?" The question was too casual, too direct. Mason busied himself with the coffee pot, buying seconds to compose his answer. "Nothing this morning. Visibility was too poor to see much of anything." The lie tasted bitter, but instinct told him truth would be dangerous. Ramirez leaned against the doorframe, blocking the only exit from the kitchen. "Funny thing, dispatch lost contact with one of our officers around 0300. Officer Mitchell, Sarah Mitchell, young woman, dark hair, good cop. Concerned about her with the roads the way they are." Mason poured coffee into a mug, careful to keep his hand steady. "Haven't seen any officers out this way. If I do, I'll be sure to call it in." The radio on Ramirez's shoulder crackled to life. "Sheriff, we've got a situation at mile marker 16. Need your input." Ramirez held Mason's gaze for a beat too long before answering. "Copy that. En route." He accepted the coffee mug with a nod. "Mind if I use your bathroom before heading back out?" It wasn't really a question. Mason gestured down the hallway, every muscle tense as Ramirez disappeared around the corner. The bathroom was uncomfortably close to the pantry where Sarah and Ethan were hiding. Mason heard the toilet flush the water run. Then silence stretched for too long. He was about to investigate when Ramirez reappeared, wiping his hands on a paper towel. "Appreciate the hospitality. Better get back to it." Ramirez headed for the door, pausing with his hand on the knob. "One more thing. Found some blood out by the bridge. If you happen to see anyone or anything unusual, you call me directly." "Not dispatch. Me." He pulled a card from his pocket and placed it on the side table. Mason nodded, not trusting himself to speak. Something in Ramirez's tone made it clear this wasn't standard procedure. "Give my best to Ethan. Good kid. Shame about Emily. Community's here for you both." The words were right, but the delivery was off, like an actor who hadn't quite memorized his lines. The door closed behind Ramirez, and Mason watched through the window as the sheriff's SUV backed down the driveway. Only when the taillights disappeared into the swirling snow did he release the breath he'd been holding. "He's gone," Mason called softly. Sarah emerged from the pantry, Ethan's hand clutched in hers. Ranger followed, his body still rigid with tension. The dog went straight to the front door, sniffing along the frame where Ramirez had stood. "He knows," Sarah's voice was flat. "He was looking for me." "Dad, I'm scared." Ethan pressed against Mason's side, small fingers clutching his sweater. Mason lifted his son, holding him close, feeling the rapid beat of his heart. "It's okay, buddy. Just a misunderstanding." The lie felt necessary, a shield between his child and whatever danger Sarah had brought to their door. Sarah's eyes met his over Ethan's head, a silent apology in them. "I should go. I've put you both at risk. In this weather, with those injuries, and go where—" Mason gestured toward the window where the storm had intensified again. "Besides, Ramirez has already connected the dots. Running now won't help." Ranger whined, pressing against Sarah's leg. The dog's loyalty to this stranger remained a puzzle piece that didn't fit. "Ethan, how about you go up to your room and build that Lego spaceship? I need to talk to Officer Mitchell for a bit." Mason set his son down, ruffling his hair. "Can Ranger come with me?" Ethan looked between the adults, sensing the gravity of the situation, despite Mason's attempts to shield him. Sarah shook her head. "I think Ranger needs to stay for this conversation, sweetheart, but I promise you can play with him after." Once Ethan's footsteps had receded upstairs, Mason turned to Sarah, no longer bothering to hide his suspicion. "Time for the truth. All of it." Sarah sank onto the couch, energy seeming to drain from her. Ranger immediately climbed up beside her, pressing his warm body against her side in a clear gesture of support. "Where do I even start?" Her fingers tangled in Ranger's fur, seeking comfort. "Start with why my dog, who's terrified of police uniforms, acts like he's known you his whole life." Mason remained standing, arms crossed. "And why Sheriff Ramirez hunting for you feels like something out of a crime thriller rather than a concerned superior looking for his officer." Sarah's eyes closed briefly, gathering strength. When she opened them, Mason saw a different woman, harder, more focused, the vulnerability replaced by determination. "Your dog is terrified of police uniforms because the last time he wore one, he watched his handler get murdered." Her voice was steady now, clinical almost. "His name wasn't Bruno. It was Ranger K9 Unit 5, partnered with Detective Michael Mitchell, my husband." Mason felt the floor shift beneath him as pieces clicked into terrible alignment. "Your husband was murdered 2 years ago during what was supposed to be a routine drug bust. Shot twice in the chest. Ranger was wounded trying to protect him." Sarah's hand moved to a spot behind the dog's left ear where Mason had noticed a scar partially hidden by fur. "After Michael died, they retired Ranger early. Said he was too traumatized for service. I couldn't keep him because—" Her voice broke for the first time. "Because looking at him reminded me of everything I'd lost." Ranger whined softly, pushing his head under her hand as if trying to comfort her. The gesture carried such profound understanding that Mason felt his throat tighten. "So how did he end up at the county shelter?" Mason asked, pieces still not fitting perfectly. "I don't know. I thought he'd been placed with a special K9 retirement program. Someone must have—" She trailed off, implications hanging in the air. "When I saw him with you today, I couldn't believe it. I thought I was hallucinating from the crash." Mason sat heavily in the armchair across from her. "And the crash, Ramirez," Sarah's expression hardened. "Not an accident. I've been working undercover for 18 months, building a case against a drug trafficking operation that's been using police resources. Sheriff Ramirez is at the center of it all. The same operation that killed your husband." It wasn't a question. Sarah nodded, her hand never leaving Ranger's fur. "Michael stumbled onto it accidentally. A shipment manifest that didn't match official records. He started asking questions, and a week later, he was dead. Killed in the line of duty was the official story. The department gave him a hero's funeral with full honors." Mason remembered the news coverage, a fallen officer, a grieving widow, a wounded K9. It had been a major story even in their small community. "And you've been investigating since then?" "Not officially at first. The department closed the case as a drug dealer's retaliation. But I knew better. Michael had told me he trusted no one but his partner and me. So I started digging, gathering evidence, building connections. Until someone realized what you were doing." Mason was putting it together now. 6 months ago, I took everything I had to the FBI. They brought me in, officially created a deep cover operation. I've been working from inside gathering evidence against Ramirez and the others. Sarah's voice dropped. Last night I was transporting a flash drive with everything we need to bring down the entire network. Names, dates, accounts, evidence of at least 3 murders, including Michael's. Ranger's ears pricked forward at the mention of Michael's name, his intelligent eyes fixed on Sarah's face. They must have been tracking me somehow. The crash wasn't an accident, they forced me off the road. If you and Ranger hadn't found me, she left the sentence unfinished. Mason ran a hand through his hair, processing the enormity of what she'd revealed. And the flash drive, Sarah's expression fell. Lost in the crash, I think. Everything we've been working toward. Ranger suddenly stood up on the couch, ears alert, tail wagging with purpose rather than happiness. He jumped down and trotted to Mason, pushing his nose against his hand insistently. "What is it, boy?" Mason watched as the dog returned to Sarah, then back to him, the behavior reminiscent of how he acted when trying to show Ethan something. Sarah leaned forward, studying the dog. "He's trying to tell us something." Ranger moved to the front door, looking back expectantly. When neither human followed, he returned to Sarah, tugging gently at her sleeve with his teeth, then back to the door. "He wants to go back to the crash site." Sarah's voice held a note of wonder. Michael trained him to recover evidence. It was his specialty. Mason checked his watch. "The storm's letting up a bit, but it'll be dark in a few hours, and you're in no condition to trek back out there." "But you are." Sarah's eyes held a plea more powerful than words. "Trust isn't about knowing everything. It's about believing someone's worth the risk." The statement hung between them, a challenge and a confession wrapped in one. Mason looked from Sarah to Ranger and back again, weighing more than just the immediate decision. "I'll need to get Mrs. Jensen from next door to stay with Ethan." Mason was already mentally preparing, thinking through the risks. "And if Ramirez comes back while I'm gone, I know how to defend myself and your son." Sarah's hand moved instinctively toward her service weapon. "My shooting scores were higher than Michael's." Mason nodded, decision made. "You'll need to tell Ethan something. Not everything, but something. He deserves that much." While Mason called his neighbor and gathered supplies, Sarah spoke with Ethan upstairs. Through the open door, Mason caught fragments of their conversation, enough to know she was being honest about danger without terrifying him. Ranger sat at the top of the stairs, a guardian to them both. 20 minutes later, Mason was ready to leave. He wore his heaviest winter gear and carried a backpack with tools, first aid supplies, and emergency rations habits from his military days that had never faded. "Ranger should stay with you," Mason said as he checked his flashlight batteries. "For protection." Sarah shook her head. "You'll need him to find the flash drive if it's still there. He's trained for this, Mason. And Mrs. Jensen will be here soon." Mason knelt to Ethan's level by the door. "Remember what we talked about, buddy? Mrs. Jensen is in charge. Stay inside and do exactly what she and Officer Mitchell tell you." Ethan nodded solemnly. "Will you be back for dinner? Mrs. Jensen always makes mac and cheese with the gross breadcrumbs." The moment of ordinary childhood complaint in the midst of danger nearly undid Mason. He pulled his son into a tight hug. "I'll be back before you know it." As he straightened, Sarah caught his arm. "Be careful. Ramirez might have men watching the crash site." "Not my first rodeo." The words slipped out before Mason could stop them, a glimpse of his past. Sarah's eyes narrowed slightly. "You're not just a mechanic, are you?" "Not just." Mason left it at that. Some stories would have to wait. The cold hit him like a physical blow as he stepped outside, Ranger at his heels. The dog moved with newfound purpose, no longer the traumatized rescue, but a working canine with a mission. They moved swiftly through the snow, Mason following slightly behind, letting Ranger lead the way back to the crash site. The forest was eerily silent, the storm having driven wildlife to shelter. Their footprints from earlier were already filling with fresh snow, but Ranger navigated unerringly, his training overriding the years of civilian life. As they neared Elk Creek Bridge, Mason signaled at Ranger to stop, dropping into a crouch behind a fallen tree. Years of combat had taught him to survey before approaching. The crashed police cruiser remained where they'd left it, partially buried under new snowfall. No fresh tracks surrounded it, but Mason knew that meant little in these conditions. He watched for 5 full minutes, scanning the tree line, the road, the bridge. Nothing moved except falling snow and the occasional branch bending under its weight. Finally satisfied, he signaled Ranger forward. The dog approached the crashed vehicle with professional focus, circling it once before beginning to dig at a spot several yards away where the cruiser had initially left the road. Mason kept watch, dividing his attention between Ranger's efforts and their surroundings. Ranger's excited whine drew Mason's attention. The dog had uncovered something in the snow, a small leather case about the size of a wallet. Mason retrieved it, brushing off ice crystals. Inside, nestled in protective foam, was a flash drive. Good boy. Mason pocketed the case and patted Ranger's head. The dog's tail wagged once, then he froze, head turning sharply toward the bridge. Mason heard it a second later, the distant sound of an engine. He and Ranger retreated quickly to the tree line, finding cover behind thick pines just as headlights appeared on the road. A county sheriff's SUV, not Ramirez's, but similar, approached, slowly stopping near the crashed cruiser. Two deputies emerged, rifles ready. Even from a distance, Mason could tell these weren't normal search and rescue operations. The men moved with tactical precision, checking the vehicle and surrounding area methodically. Find anything? One deputy's voice carried in the cold air. Nothing. If she survived, she's long gone. The second deputy kicked at the snow in frustration. Ramirez is gonna be pissed. She couldn't have gotten far in this weather, not with those injuries. Someone must have picked her up. Mason felt Ranger tense beside him, a low growl building in the dog's chest. He placed a restraining hand on the animal's back, silently commanding him to stay quiet. The last thing they needed was to alert the deputies to their presence. What about the flash drive? That's what Ramirez really wants. Could be anywhere, under the snow in the creek. We'll need a team out here when the weather clears. The deputies made a cursory search of the immediate area before returning to their vehicle. Let's check Reynolds' place again. His house isn't far from here. If anyone found her, it'd be him. Mason's blood ran cold. They knew. Somehow they had connected him to Sarah's disappearance. He waited until the SUV had disappeared around the bend before moving, mind racing through scenarios. Come on, boy. We need to get back. Now. Mason set off at a jog, Ranger loping easily beside him. The urgency of their situation drove him faster than caution would normally allow, but time had become their enemy. They cut through the forest rather than following the road, Mason pushing through drifts that sometimes reached his knees. His lungs burned with the effort, but fear for Ethan and Sarah drove him forward. As they crested the final ridge that overlooked his property, Mason dropped to his stomach in the snow, pulling Ranger down beside him. Below, a sheriff's SUV was parked in his driveway, its light bar dark, the same one from the bridge. Mason's heart hammered against his ribs as he surveyed his home, looking for signs of disturbance. The house appeared quiet, smoke rising normally from the chimney. Mrs. Jensen's old station wagon was parked to the side, partially covered in fresh snow. No signs of forced entry or struggle were visible from this distance. What do you think, boy? Safe to approach? Mason whispered to Ranger. The dog's ears were forward, alert, but not alarmed. After a moment's concentration, he gave a soft whine that Mason interpreted as uncertainty. Mason weighed his options. The deputies might simply be interviewing him as a local resident, checking if he'd seen anything. Or they could be searching for evidence of Sarah planning to report back to Ramirez. Either way, walking in the front door seemed risky. He remembered the old storm cellar, accessible from outside, but connecting to the basement through a trap door that Ethan thought was secret. It had been Emily's idea to maintain it as an emergency shelter, stocked with supplies and an old ham radio. Mason had kept it up more out of respect for her memory than practical concern. Come on, we're taking the back way. Mason led Ranger down the ridge, circling wide, to approach his property from behind, using the tree line as cover. They reached the storm cellar doors without incident, partially hidden by a stand of evergreens. Mason brushed away snow and pulled one door open, just enough for them to slip inside. The air was cold but dry, the darkness absolute until Mason clicked on his flashlight. The narrow space was lined with shelves of emergency supplies, just as Emily had organized them. At the far end, a ladder led up to the trap door that opened into the basement storage room. Mason listened carefully before ascending Ranger, waiting patiently below. The house was quiet above him. Mason pushed gently on the trap door, lifting it just enough to peer into the basement. Empty. He climbed up and signaled Ranger to follow, then eased the trap door closed behind them. Mason crept up the basement stairs, straining to hear voices. As he neared the top, Ethan's laughter drifted down, followed by the deeper tones of a man's voice. Not Ramirez, but someone familiar. One of the deputies from the bridge. He eased the basement door open a crack. From his limited angle, he could see part of the living room was. Jensen sat on the couch, her silver hair neatly pinned back as always, hands clutching her ever-present knitting. Across from her, one deputy sat in Mason's armchair, leaning forward with a friendly expression that didn't match the alertness in his eyes. "So Mr. Reynolds is just out checking on his generator. In this weather?" The deputy's tone was conversational but probing. "Mason's very particular about that generator. Since Emily passed, he's been extra careful about everything." Mrs. Jensen's needles clicked steadily, her voice betraying no anxiety. "Should be back any minute. You're welcome to wait, Officer Davis." Mason couldn't see Sarah or the second deputy from his position. Ranger pressed against his leg body, tense but controlled. The dog's training was evident in every line of his body, waiting for commands ready to act. A floorboard creaked upstairs, and Mason's attention snapped to the ceiling. Ethan's bedroom was directly above. The second deputy must be up there searching. Mason's mind raced. Where was Sarah? Had she hidden, fled? Been captured? The flash drive felt heavy in his pocket, a dangerous secret that could get them all killed. The basement door opened wider, seemingly on its own, and Mason tensed for discovery. Instead, Sarah's face appeared in the gap, finger to her lips. Relief washed through him as she slipped into the basement, closing the door silently behind her. "Thank God," she whispered. "They showed up 10 minutes after you left. Mrs. Jensen played along perfectly, said you were checking the generator shed. The second deputy is searching upstairs. I hid in the crawl space under the eaves." Mason pulled the flash drive from his pocket. "Ranger found it." Sarah's eyes widened, a mixture of hope and disbelief. She took the case with trembling hands, checking the contents. "This is it. Everything we need to bring down Ramirez and his entire operation. Now we just need to get it to someone who can use it," Mason replied, "and get these deputies out of my house." Sarah's expression turned grimly determined. "I have an idea, but you'll need to trust me completely. And it might get messy. I'm listening." As Sarah outlined her plan, Mason felt the weight of the moment pressing down on him. The safety of his son, the justice Sarah sought, the very lives of everyone in the house, on hanging in the balance of decisions made in a dark basement while corrupt deputies searched above them. Whatever happened next would change everything. Mason thought of Emily, of the life they'd built, of the promises he'd made to protect their son. Then he looked at Sarah, a woman who'd lost everything but still fought for what was right, and at Ranger, a dog who'd found his purpose again after trauma had nearly destroyed him. "Let's do it." Mason nodded, decision made. "Whatever it takes." Sarah's plan unfolded quickly. She handed Mason a small pocket knife from her boot. "Cut my arm just enough to draw blood. Then go upstairs like you've just returned. Tell them you found me unconscious by the creek that I wandered from the crash. Say you recognize me as law enforcement and brought me back, but I'm delirious injured." Mason hesitated, the knife cold in his palm. "And the flash drive?" Sarah pulled a bobby pin from her hair and expertly popped open the leather case. She removed the flash drive and slipped it into a thin waterproof pouch hung around her neck, tucking it beneath her shirt. "We'll need a distraction to get out of here safely. My FBI handler has a safe house in Denver, but we can't call from here. The local lines might be compromised." Mason understood the logic, but still balked at the thought of deliberately injuring her. Sarah saw his hesitation and took the knife, making a swift, shallow cut along her forearm. Blood welled immediately, dripping onto the concrete floor. "Sometimes you have to bleed a little to survive," she whispered, pressing the wound to intensify the bleeding. "Now go. Remember, you found me half-conscious by the creek after checking the generator. You have no idea what happened to me." Mason nodded, his military training kicking in, compartmentalizing emotions, focusing on the mission. He moved quietly upstairs, Ranger following obediently. At the top of the basement stairs, he deliberately made noise, opening and closing the door loudly. "Mrs. Jensen, Ethan, I'm back." His voice carried the right notes of surprise at finding a deputy in his living room. "Officer, what's going on?" Deputy Davis stood quickly, hand instinctively moving toward his weapon before relaxing. "Mr. Reynolds, we were just checking on local residents after the storm. Your neighbor said you were out back." Mason removed his snow-covered coat, playing the part of a man who'd been outdoors, checking the generator. "But listen, I found someone down by the creek, a woman injured. I think she's that missing officer. I brought her back just now through the mudroom. The deputy's posture changed instantly, alert and suspicious. Where is she? Mason gestured toward the kitchen. Laid her on the floor in there. She's in rough shape, might have been out in the cold all night. Davis touched his radio. Collins, get down here. Reynolds found Mitchell. The second deputy appeared at the top of the stairs, his hand resting casually on his holstered weapon. Mason recognized the calculated nonchalance of a man ready to draw at a moment's notice. Where's your boy? Mason asked Mrs. Jensen, injecting worry into his voice. Upstairs in his room. I told him to stay put. The elderly woman's knitting needles had stopped her usual placidity, replaced by tension. Mason led the deputies into the kitchen, where Sarah lay on the floor, eyes half closed, blood seeping through her torn uniform sleeve. She'd positioned herself strategically back against the cabinets, clear view of both entrances, her service weapon just out of obvious sight beneath her leg. Ranger planted himself beside her, hackles raised as the deputies approached. The dog's protective stance wasn't an act. Careful with that mutt, Collins warned, eyeing Ranger warily. Davis knelt beside Sarah, checking her pulse. Officer Mitchell, can you hear me? Sarah's eyes fluttered open, her performance convincing. Michael, she whispered, naming her dead husband. Is that you? Davis exchanged a glance with the Collins. She's delirious. We need to get her to the station, have Doc Winters take a look. Shouldn't we call an ambulance? Mason suggested, knowing they wouldn't. Roads to the hospital are still blocked. Station's closer. Davis helped Sarah to her feet. Can you walk, officer? Sarah leaned heavily against him, playing weak but not completely incapacitated. Where am I? What happened? Collins moved to Sarah's other side. We've got you now. Sheriff Ramirez has been worried sick. At Ramirez's name, Ranger growled low in his throat. Davis noticed eyes narrowing. That dog seems mighty protective of her for someone he just met. Mason scrambled for an explanation. He was a rescue. Maybe he was police trained before I got him. The moment stretched dangerously until Sarah swayed dramatically, nearly collapsing. The deputies focused on supporting her momentarily, forgetting the dog's strange behavior. We'll take her from here, Mr. Reynolds. Thanks for your help. Davis began steering Sarah toward the door. Mason followed, maintaining his concerned citizen act. Should I come to the station? Give a statement about where I found her? That won't be necessary. Collins' dismissal came too quickly. We'll be in touch if we need anything else. Sarah caught Mason's eye over Davis's shoulder, a silent message passing between them. The plan was working. She was getting inside their vehicle exactly as she'd intended. But the next part would be the most dangerous. At least let me get her some dry clothes, Mason insisted. She soaked through could get hypothermia. Fine, make it quick. Davis's impatience betrayed his desire to leave. Mason hurried to his bedroom, grabbing a sweater and sweatpants from his dresser. As he turned to leave, he spotted his old military go-bag in the closet. In one fluid motion, he unzipped the side pocket and removed a small tracking device, a remnant from his Special Forces days that he'd never returned. He slipped it into the folded sweater, a precaution in case everything went sideways. Back in the living room, he handed the clothes to Sarah. Hope these help. You can change at the station. She accepted them with trembling hands, partly act, partly genuine fatigue. Thank you for everything. The deputies escorted Sarah outside to their SUV. Mason stood in the doorway with Mrs. Jensen and Ranger, maintaining the facade until the vehicle disappeared down his long driveway. Lord have mercy, Mrs. Jensen whispered, crossing herself. What kind of trouble have you gotten mixed up in Mason Reynolds? Mason closed the door, checking the windows for any signs of surveillance. The kind that might get us all killed if we don't move fast. Where's Ethan? Still upstairs like I told him. That deputy searched his room, made a mess of things. Mrs. Jensen's usual gentleness hardened into something fiercer. I may be old, but I know dirty cops when I see them. My Harold was on the force 40 years, God rest his soul. Mason checked his watch. Mrs. Jensen, I need a massive favor. Can Ethan stay with you tonight? Pack enough for a few days just in case. Understanding dawned in the elderly woman's eyes. You're going after her. She saved my life in Afghanistan. The lie came easily, a necessary fiction to explain his involvement without revealing Sarah's true purpose. I owe her this. Mrs. Jensen nodded, no further explanation needed. We'll take good care of him. My shotgun's still loaded in the hall closet, same as when Harold was alive. Mason squeezed her shoulder gratefully, then bounded upstairs to find Ethan. His son sat on his bed legs, pulled up to his chest, eyes wide with unspoken questions. "Hey, buddy, change of plans. You're having a sleepover at Mrs. Jensen's tonight." Ethan's perceptiveness cut through the cheerful pretense. "It's because of the police lady, isn't it? The bad men are looking for her." Mason knelt before his son, struck by how quickly childhood innocence could be stripped away by circumstance. "Yes, Officer Mitchell is in trouble and I need to help her, but you'll be safe with Mrs. Jensen. Like when you were a soldier, helping people who are in danger." Ethan's question hit with unexpected force. Mason had never spoken much about his military service, preferring to shield his son from those darker chapters. "Something like that. I need you to be brave like you were when Mom was sick. Can you do that for me?" Ethan nodded solemnly. "Ranger should go with you. He's good at protecting people." "That's exactly what I was thinking." Mason helped Ethan pack a small backpack, keeping the mood light despite the urgency thrumming through his veins. Within 20 minutes, Ethan was safely installed at Mrs. Jensen's house next door. Mason knelt for a final hug, breathing in his son's familiar scent of soap and Play-Doh. "I love you more than anything in this world. You know that, right?" Ethan's small arms tightened around his neck. "Come back, Dad. Promise." The simple request lodged in Mason's throat. Wild horses couldn't keep me away. Back at his house, Mason moved with practiced efficiency. He changed into thermal layers and dark clothing, pulled his military boots from the back of the closet, and retrieved his go bag from beneath the bed. Inside were essentials he'd never thought he'd need again: tactical gear, first aid supplies, communications equipment, and a 9mm Glock with spare magazines. "A man's measure isn't what he can take," his father had once told him. "It's what he's willing to protect when everything's on the line." Ranger watched from the doorway, sensing the shift in atmosphere. The dog's posture had changed, alert, focused, ready for action. This wasn't the traumatized shelter rescue anymore. This was a trained K-9 officer preparing for deployment. Mason activated the tracking device using his old military handheld receiver. The signal was strong. Sarah still had the sweater with the tracker in the deputy's vehicle. They were heading west on County Road 16 toward the sheriff's station in town. He loaded his truck with supplies, Ranger jumping eagerly into the passenger seat. The dog's training was evident in every movement, precise, controlled, purpose-driven. Mason wondered how he'd missed the signs of professional training before. Perhaps because Ranger had worked so hard to hide them, to be just a pet, to escape the trauma of his past. Mason chose back roads, avoiding the main highway where he might encounter other deputy vans. The storm had passed, leaving behind a crystalline landscape of snow-draped pines and ice-glazed meadows. Under different circumstances, he might have found it beautiful. The tracker showed the deputy's SUV had reached the sheriff's station. Mason parked a quarter-mile away on a service road behind the town's water treatment plant, out of sight, but within observation distance. "Stay," he commanded Ranger, who settled into a waiting posture, understanding the mission parameters. Mason retrieved a pair of compact binoculars from his bag. The sheriff's station was a single-story brick building, deceptively quaint for the corruption it housed. Through the binoculars, he watched Deputies Davis and Collins escort Sarah inside through a side entrance, bypassing the main reception area. Something felt wrong. Standard procedure would take an injured officer through the front where the station's medical supplies were kept. Instead, they were heading toward the interrogation rooms in the back. Mason checked his watch. Nearly 5:30 p.m. The winter sun was already setting, darkness falling quickly over the small town. He needed a closer position to monitor the situation and determine his next move. The water treatment plant provided a solution. Mason remembered the layout from a school field trip with Ethan. The facility backed up directly to the police station property, separated only by a chain-link fence and a narrow service alley. "Come," he whispered to Ranger, and they made their way through the silent treatment plant. The weekend skeleton crew had gone home early due to the storm, leaving the facility deserted. From the plant's rear loading dock, Mason had a perfect view of the station's back entrance and the row of windows that corresponded to the interrogation rooms. One window glowed with light, second from the left. Through the partially open blinds, he could make out Sarah seated at a table, Deputies Davis and Collins standing nearby. No sign of Ramirez yet, but Mason knew it was only a matter of time. He needed to get closer, needed to hear what was happening. The fence between properties presented little challenge. Mason had scaled worse in full combat gear under enemy fire. He helped Ranger over first, then followed, landing silently in the packed snow of the service alley. They pressed against the station's brick wall, inching toward the illuminated window. Raised voices filtered through the glass. Collins sounded agitated. Davis more controlled. Not playing games anymore, Mitchell. Where's the flash drive? Sarah's response was too quiet to hear, but whatever she said made Collins slam something against the table. Your husband didn't understand his place either. Some lessons have to be taught the hard way. Mason's blood boiled at the casual reference to Michael's murder. He inched closer to the window, careful to stay below the sill. Ranger remained at his side, utterly silent despite the tension vibrating through his muscular frame. Sheriff's on his way, Davis's voice came clearer now. He'll want to handle this personally. Last chance to make this easy on yourself. I don't know what you're talking about. Sarah's voice finally reached Mason, steady despite her situation. I was in a car accident, that's all I remember. The door to the interrogation room opened. Mason crouched lower, barely breathing. Sheriff Ramirez's voice filled the room, calm and conversational, in a way that raised goosebumps on Mason's arms. Sarah, so good to see you alive. We were all very concerned when your cruiser went missing. A chair scraped across the floor. Ramirez sitting down, Mason guessed. Unfortunate about your memory loss? Perhaps I can help fill in some blanks. You were transporting evidence that doesn't exist, I should add, making wild accusations against respected members of this department. Then you crashed. Tragic accident. If this evidence doesn't exist, why are you so interested in finding it? Sarah's challenge hung in the air. Ramirez chuckled, the sound devoid of humor. Always the fighter, just like Michael. That didn't end well for him, did it? The cruelty of the remark hit Mason like a physical blow. Beside him, Ranger's body tensed, a tremor running through the dog's powerful muscles. The animal remembered the man who had killed his partner. I'm going to ask, once Sarah, then things get unpleasant. Where is the flash drive? Mason heard movement inside the room. Someone opening a drawer, objects being placed on the table. The implication turned his stomach. Lost in the crash, Sarah's voice remained defiant. Go search for it yourself. We will, but first let's be thorough here. No stone unturned. Ramirez's tone shifted to businesslike efficiency. Davis, check her again. Collins watched the door. No interruptions. Mason had heard enough. Sarah was in immediate danger and he was outnumbered. He needed a distraction, something to draw attention away from the interrogation room while he found a way inside. The answer came in the form of the station's rear parking lot. Half a dozen vehicles sat in the fading light, including Ramirez's distinctive black SUV with sheriff's department markings. An idea formed, risky but effective. Mason retreated from the window, signaling Ranger to follow. They circled to the parking lot, staying in the shadows. Mason pulled a multi-tool from his pocket and approached the nearest patrol car. Within seconds, he had triggered the alarm, then moved quickly to repeat the process on 2 more vehicles. The effect was immediate. Shrieking alarms and flashing lights filled the quiet evening. The station's back door burst open, Collins emerging with weapon drawn, scanning the parking lot. 2 other deputies followed, spreading out to investigate the disturbance. Mason seized the opportunity, slipping inside the momentarily unguarded door with Ranger at his heels. They found themselves in a narrow hallway lined with filing cabinets. The interrogation room was 3 doors down on the right, according to the station layout Mason remembered from a long-ago citizen's tour. He pressed his ear against the door, listening. Ramirez's voice came through, tense with annoyance. Davis, go see what the hell that is. I'm not finished here. The door handle turned. Mason flattened himself against the wall as Deputy Davis emerged, closing the door behind him. The moment Davis turned toward the parking lot, commotion, Mason struck a precise blow to the base of the skull that dropped the deputy without a sound. He dragged Davis into a nearby supply closet, securing him with zip ties from his tactical belt. Now came the hard part. Mason drew his weapon, signaling Ranger to ready position. The dog's training instantly surfaced, body lowered. Muscles coiled, ready to attack on command. Mason tried the door handle, unlocked. He took a deep breath, then threw the door open, weapon raised. The scene inside froze and a tableau of violence interrupted. Ramirez stood over Sarah, a hand fisted in her hair, the other holding a tactical knife. Sarah's face was bruised, a trickle of blood running from her split lip. but her eyes blazed with defiance. Reynolds. Ramirez's shock gave Mason a critical second of advantage. Down now. Mason's command voice filled the small room. Ramirez recovered quickly, yanking Sarah up as a human shield, the knife pressed to her throat. Put the gun down, Reynolds. This doesn't concern you. Ranger growled low, a sound that raised primitive fear in human minds. Ramirez's eyes flickered to the dog recognition dawning. Well, well, the gang's all here. The grieving widow and her husband's mutt. His laugh held genuine amusement. You have no idea what you've stumbled into, Reynolds. Mason kept his weapon steady, searching for a clear shot that wouldn't endanger Sarah. I know enough. I know you killed Michael Mitchell. I know you're running drugs through this department. And I know that Flash Drive has everything the FBI needs to bury you. Uncertainty flashed across Ramirez's face, the first crack in his confident facade. There is no Flash Drive. She's been chasing ghosts for 2 years. Sarah's eyes met Mason's, a silent message passing between them. She still had it secured against her body. Her next words confirmed it. It's over, Dominic. You're done. The FBI has everything: shipping manifest, bank records, the dash cam footage from Michael's cruiser that your men thought they destroyed. All of it. Ramirez's knife pressed harder, drawing a thin line of blood. You're bluffing. Mason recognized the desperation in Ramirez's eyes, the look of a cornered predator. He needed to defuse the situation before the sheriff did something irreversible. The FBI is already on their way, Mason lied smoothly. Sarah contacted her handler hours ago. You really think she'd come back here without backup? Doubt crept into Ramirez's expression. You're lying. All lines were down during the storm. Not satellite phones, Mason countered. How do you think Special Forces communicates in remote locations? The reference to Special Forces wasn't lost on Ramirez, whose eyes narrowed, reassessing Mason. You're not just some small-town mechanic, are you? Mason saw his opening, Ramirez's curiosity distracting him just enough. He gave the command they'd been waiting for, pitched just above a whisper. Ranger, take. What happened next unfolded in a blur of precision and violence. Ranger launched across the room, a missile of muscle and teeth aimed directly at Ramirez's knife arm. The sheriff tried to pivot, but the dog's jaws clamped onto his wrist with crushing force. Sarah drove her elbow back into Ramirez's solar plexus, breaking his grip as she dropped to the floor. Mason closed the distance in 2 strides, weapon now pressed directly to Ramirez's temple. Don't move. Blood poured from the sheriff's mangled wrist, Ranger maintaining his grip with professional determination. The sheriff's knife lay forgotten on the floor where it had fallen. Call off your dog, Ramirez gasped, face contorted with pain. Ranger, hold, Mason commanded. The dog maintained his grip, but stopped applying additional pressure. That's former Staff Sergeant Mason Reynolds' 5th Special Forces Group, and you picked the wrong family to threaten. Sarah retrieved her service weapon from the table where it had been placed, training it on Ramirez. Ranger, release. The dog immediately obeyed, backing up to stand guard while Sarah secured the sheriff with his own handcuffs. Mason kept his weapon trained on Ramirez, every sense alert for the return of Collins or other deputies. We need to move, Mason urged, helping Sarah to her feet. Collins will be back any minute. Sarah nodded, visibly gathering her strength. There's a back exit through the evidence room. Less chance of running into anyone. They secured Ramirez to the heavy metal table bolted to the floor, gagging him with his own bandana. Mason retrieved a first aid kit from the wall, quickly addressing Sarah's injuries. I'll be fine, she insisted, wincing as he cleaned the cut on her neck. We need to go. Not without insurance. Sarah turned to Ramirez, her expression hardening. Where's your personal laptop, the one you never let anyone touch? Fear flashed in Ramirez's eyes, confirmation that Sarah had hit a nerve. She removed the gag, pressing her weapon to his temple. Location, now. Office, safe behind the fishing photo, combination 321744. Ramirez's admission came grudgingly, knowing he was already compromised. Sarah replaced the gag, then nodded to Mason. Cover me. 5 minutes. While she disappeared to retrieve the laptop, Mason kept watch over Ramirez, Ranger standing guard at the door. The sheriff's eyes burned with hatred, but beneath it, Mason recognized something else. The dawning realization that his empire was crumbling. Trauma doesn't break a dog like that. It reveals what they're made of, Mason observed, watching Ranger's disciplined stance. Same goes for people. You broke the wrong woman, Sheriff. Footsteps in the hallway sent Mason into immediate defensive position. The door handle turned slowly. Mason raised his weapon ready to fire, then lowered it as Sarah slipped back inside a slim laptop under her arm. Got it. But we've got company. Collins and two others just came in the front. They're checking the holding cells first, but we've got maybe 3 minutes. Mason nodded toward the back exit. Lead the way. Sarah guided them through a maze of corridors, past the evidence room, and toward a rarely used maintenance exit. Ranger moved silently beside them, occasionally pausing to listen for pursuit. The exit door was chained shut, a fire code violation that worked in their favor as no alarm would sound when breached. Mason made quick work of the padlock with his multi-tool, and they emerged into the gathering darkness behind the station. My truck's behind the water treatment plant, Mason whispered as they crept along the building's shadow. A shout from inside the station told them Ramirez had been discovered. Seconds later, emergency lights began flashing, bathing the snow in pulses of red and blue. Run, Sarah urged, and they sprinted across the open ground toward the fence separating the properties. Mason boosted Sarah over first, then helped Ranger across. He was halfway over himself when a gunshot cracked through the evening air. The bullet struck the metal fence post inches from his head, sending vibrations through the chain link. Reynolds, stop, or the next one won't miss. Collins stood in the station's doorway, weapon raised. Mason dropped to the ground on the water plant side, rolling to cover as more shots followed. Sarah returned fire, providing cover as he scrambled to his feet. Go! Get to the truck! Mason pushed Sarah ahead while he and Ranger provided rear guard. They raced through the water treatment plant, bullets pinging off metal tanks behind them. Mason's truck stood where he'd left it, hidden from street view. He unlocked it remotely as they approached Sarah, diving into the passenger seat while Ranger leapt into the back. Mason gunned the engine before his door was fully closed, tires spinning on the snow-covered service road. In the rearview mirrors, he saw Collins and another deputy emerging from the plant, still in pursuit. Where to? Mason asked, taking a sharp turn onto a residential street to break line of sight. Sarah pulled the flash drive from beneath her shirt, clutching it like a talisman. West. My handler has a safe house in Gold Creek, about 2 hours from here if the roads are clear. We need to call him, but not from here. They could be monitoring cell towers. Mason nodded, navigating the quiet streets of Pinewood with practiced familiarity, avoiding main roads where roadblocks might already be forming. There's a truck stop on Highway 40 with payphones. We can call from there. Sarah's eyes widened suddenly. Mason, your son. Ethan's safe with Mrs. Jensen. Mason checked the mirrors, constantly watching for pursuit. But they know I'm involved now. We can't go back until this is over. The gravity of what he'd done, antagonizing a corrupt sheriff, assaulting deputies, becoming a fugitive, hit Mason with the force of a physical blow. He'd stepped back into a world he thought he'd left behind, risking everything for a woman he barely knew, on the strength of her connection to his dog. As if reading his thoughts, Sarah placed a hand on his arm. I'm sorry I brought this to your door. You and Ethan deserve better. Mason shook his head. Some fights choose you. After Emily died, I thought I was done fighting. Turns out I just needed the right cause. They drove in silence for several miles, taking back roads through farmland and forest. The truck's heater gradually thawed their frozen extremities, bringing painful awareness of injuries. Sarah's split lip and knife wound, Mason's bruised knuckles from subduing Davis. Why did you do it? Sarah asked finally. You could have handed me over, stayed safe with your son. You had no stake in this fight. Mason considered the question as he navigated a particularly icy stretch of road. When I found Ranger at the shelter, they told me he was too damaged to be adopted. Too aggressive, too frightened, too broken. But I saw something else, a good dog who'd lost his purpose. He glanced in the rearview mirror at Ranger, now alert and watchful in the back seat. Maybe I recognized myself in him. After losing Emily, after leaving the service, I was just going through the motions. Existing, not living. When you showed up, when I saw how Ranger responded to you, it felt like purpose finding us again. The truck stop appeared ahead, a pool of fluorescent light in the darkness. Mason parked at the far end of the lot, away from security cameras and other vehicles. Wait here with Ranger, he instructed, taking some cash from his go bag. I'll make the call. The payphone stood in a small alcove near the trucker's lounge, offering minimal privacy. Mason dialed the number Sarah had given him, an anonymous sequence that would route through multiple exchanges before reaching her FBI handler. A man answered on the third ring, voice neutral. Weather service. Checking on storm conditions in Pinewood. Mason replied with the passphrase Sarah had prepared. The line went silent for a moment. Authentication. Blue Heron takes flight at dawn. Mason felt ridiculous saying the code words but understood their necessity. Connection verified. Report. Mason kept the message concise. Sarah recovered evidence, secured Ramirez and his deputies in pursuit. He provided their current location and intended route to Gold Creek. Change of plans, the handler responded. Ramirez has connections in Gold Creek PD. Proceed to Blackwater Ridge Ski Resort instead. Cabin 17. Arrival estimated 3 hours from your current position if you take Route 82. Authentication at location. The Eagle flies at midnight. Mason committed the details to memory. Understood. Any other assets in the area? Negative, you're on your own until you reach the safe house. Trust no one in uniform. The line went dead before Mason could ask more questions. He returned to the truck, processing the new information. Change of destination, he informed Sarah as he started the engine. Blackwater Ridge. Your handler says Ramirez has friends in Gold Creek. Sarah's expression darkened. That confirms our suspicions about how far this network extends. Blackwater Ridge makes sense, private property, controlled access points, plenty of witnesses around to discourage open violence. And they pulled back onto the highway, Mason constantly scanning for police vehicles or roadblocks. The night had fully descended, now the rural highway dark except for occasional passing headlights. We should ditch this truck soon, Sarah observed. It's too recognizable and Ramirez will have distributed the description and plates. Mason nodded in agreement. There's a long-term parking lot at the Silver Pine Trailhead, about 20 miles ahead. Hikers leave vehicles there for days or weeks. We can borrow transportation there. Borrow, Sarah raised an eyebrow. Special Forces training includes acquiring necessary resources in hostile territory, Mason replied with a hint of dry humor. I still remember how to hotwire a car. The storm had moved eastward, leaving behind clear skies and plummeting temperatures. Stars sparkled overhead with crystalline brilliance as they drove deeper into the mountains. Under different circumstances, it might have been beautiful. Sarah checked Ramirez's laptop, powering it on and navigating through password protections with practiced skill. He was sloppy, used his badge number as his password. What's on it? Everything. Her voice held wonder and vindication. Account numbers, contacts, shipping schedules. This isn't just a county-level operation. They're moving product across state lines, maybe internationally. DEA will want this as much as FBI. Mason spotted headlights behind them, maintaining a consistent distance. We might have company. Sarah turned to look. County sheriff vehicle. Could be routine patrol, but not taking chances. Mason accelerated slightly, watching to see if the vehicle did the same. It did. Definitely following us, Sarah confirmed, checking her weapon. Options? Mason assessed their situation with tactical precision. Silver Pine Trailhead is 5 miles ahead. Too risky now, they'd have us cornered. We need to lose them first. He took a sudden turn onto a Forest Service road, unplowed but navigable, in his four-wheel drive truck. The pursuing vehicle hesitated briefly before following high beams illuminating the narrow tree-lined path. They're calling for backup, Sarah guessed. This road dead ends at the old fire lookout. We'll be trapped. Mason allowed himself a grim smile. Not if they can't follow us. He accelerated toward a sharp bend in the road, then executed a maneuver he'd learned during winter training in Alaska, a controlled slide that positioned the truck sideways across the narrow road. The instant they stopped, he was out the door, Ranger following. What are you doing? Sarah called after him. Creating an obstacle. Mason grabbed the small chainsaw he kept behind the seat for clearing fallen branches from his property. Stay down. The pursuing vehicle's headlights grew brighter as it approached the bend. Mason started the chainsaw and made 2 quick cuts to a snow-laden pine that leaned over the road. Weakened by disease and winter weight, the tree needed little encouragement to come crashing down directly in the path of the oncoming sheriff's vehicle. Tires screeched as the deputy tried to stop on the icy road. The vehicle slid sideways, narrowly avoiding a direct collision with the fallen tree, but becoming hopelessly stuck in the deep snow of the roadside ditch. Mason was already back in his truck, turning around in the tight space beyond the blockade. They passed the stranded deputies, who were now outside their vehicle, weapons drawn, but unable to pursue on foot through the deep snow. That buys us maybe 30 minutes, Mason calculated as they rejoined the main highway. How many alternate routes to Blackwater Ridge? Sarah consulted the map on her phone. 3 main approaches. If they're coordinating, they'll cover all of them. Then we go off-road. Mason's decision was immediate. I know these mountains. There's an old logging road that connects to the resort property from the north. Unmaintained, unmarked on most maps. Sarah studied him with newfound appreciation. You really aren't just a small-town mechanic, are you? 5th Special Forces Group, Afghanistan and Syria, reconnaissance and intelligence gathering. Mason kept his eyes on the road, uncomfortable with discussing his military past. Before that, mountain rescue volunteer. These were my playground growing up. They drove in silence for several miles, Mason eventually turning onto a rutted fire road that switchbacked up the mountainside. The truck's headlights carved a narrow path through untouched snow and dense pine forest. We'll need to go on foot for the last mile or so, Mason explained as the road narrowed further. The truck won't make it past the old washout, and we'd be visible from the resort access road anyway. Sarah nodded, mentally preparing for the challenge ahead. Ranger will handle the snow, but my boots aren't exactly winter hiking gear. I have spare gear in the back, not your size, but better than freezing. Mason pulled into a small clearing surrounded by thick pines, natural concealment from aerial observation. We rest here for 15 minutes, then move out. 2 hours of hiking should put us at the resort's north boundary. They use the break to eat energy bars from Mason's go-bag refill water bottles and prepare for the hike. Mason provided Sarah with thermal socks, insulated gloves, and a spare parka that swallowed her smaller frame but would protect against the biting cold. Your handler, can he be trusted? Mason asked as he checked Ranger's paws for ice buildup. Sarah hesitated before answering. I want to say yes. He's been my only contact since this operation began. But after today, trust no one, Mason finished her thought, including your handler. Sarah nodded grimly. The corruption might reach higher than we thought. That's why this evidence is so crucial. It's unfiltered, unedited. Names, dates, accounts. If anything happens to me, nothing's going to happen to you. Mason's interruption was firm, brooking no argument. We're getting to that safe house together, all 3 of us. The hike proved as challenging as Mason had anticipated. They moved through the forest in silence, Ranger taking point, alerting to any unusual sounds or scents. The temperature had dropped below zero, their breath crystallizing instantly in the frigid air. An hour into their trek, they heard the distant whoomp whoomp of helicopter rotors. Mason immediately signaled for them to take cover beneath a dense stand of pines. Police helicopter, Sarah whispered as the sound grew louder. Mason shook his head. Wrong sound signature. That's private, maybe news, maybe charter. But we stay hidden regardless. The helicopter passed overhead without slowing its searchlight, sweeping the slopes below, but not penetrating their concealment. Once it disappeared over the ridge, they continued their journey more cautiously now. The lights of Blackwater Ridge Resort appeared through the trees, a sprawling complex of main lodge buildings, surrounded by private cabins scattered across the mountainside. Even at this late hour, some windows glowed with warmth, vacationers unaware of the drama unfolding in their midst. Cabin 17 should be on the north perimeter. Sarah consulted the mental map from her handler's instructions, isolated from the main clusters. They circled wide, approaching from the dense forest rather than the groomed ski slopes where they would be exposed. Ranger's behavior changed subtly as they neared their destination, ears pricked forward, body tense with alertness rather than alarm. He senses something, Mason whispered, immediately dropping into a defensive crouch. Sarah followed suit, hand on her weapon. Friendly or hostile? Not hostile, or he'd be more aggressive, but definitely something unusual. They approached cabin 17 with extreme caution, using the surrounding pines for cover. The cabin sat apart from others, its windows dark except for a faint glow visible through closed curtains. A single SUV with rental plates sat in the small clearing that served as a parking area. Your handler, Mason nodded toward the vehicle. Possibly, or a trap. Sarah checked her weapon one final time. How do you want to play this, Mom? Mason studied the cabin's layout, identifying entry points and potential vulnerabilities. Split up, I'll approach from the rear. You take Ranger and circle to the front. If it's your handler, Ranger's presence will verify your identity. Sarah nodded in agreement. Authentication phrase, The eagle flies at midnight. Response should be, the nest awaits its return. They separated, moving through the snow with practiced stealth. Mason circled behind the cabin, identifying a bathroom window slightly ajar despite the cold, an intentional entry point for emergency access, perhaps. He positioned himself beneath it, listening for movement inside. Voices drifted through the crack, two distinct speakers, male, conversing in low tones. Mason couldn't make out words, but the cadence suggested tension, disagreement. At the front of the cabin, Sarah would be approaching the door with Ranger. Mason readied himself to act if things went wrong, positioning to enter through the window at the first sign of trouble. The voices inside suddenly went silent. A floorboard creaked, someone moving toward the front door. Mason tensed, ready to spring into action. Then came Sarah's voice, clear in the night air. The eagle flies at midnight. A pause. Then a man's response, the nest awaits its return. Relief flooded through Mason, but he maintained his vigilance. The correct response didn't guarantee safety, only that someone knew the authentication phrase. The front door opened. Mason repositioned to see Sarah and Ranger enter the cabin, greeted by a tall man with close-cropped gray hair. Sarah's handler, presumably. But there was someone else in the cabin, a second figure Mason couldn't clearly see from his angle. Mason waited, counting seconds, watching for Sarah's all-clear signal, a casual brush of hair behind her right ear. It didn't come. Instead, her posture remained rigid, her hand never straying far from her weapon. Something was wrong. Mason moved silently to the cabin's rear door, testing the handle locked, and as expected. He retrieved his multi-tool, making quick work of the simple lock. The door opened without a sound, well-maintained hinges betraying no movement. Inside, he could hear the conversation clearly now. Didn't say anything about bringing civilians into this, Sarah. The handler's voice carried disapproval. He saved my life, Connor. Him and the dog both. Sarah's defense of Mason was immediate. The dog, I understand. But a random mechanic, this operation is too sensitive. He's former Special Forces, Sarah interrupted, and he's already compromised himself helping me escape Ramirez. We can trust him. The second man spoke for the first time, his voice triggering an immediate response in Mason recognition, though he couldn't immediately place it. No one said anything about Special Forces involvement. That complicates things. Mason moved silently through the kitchen, positioning himself to see into the main room while remaining concealed. What he saw froze the blood in his veins. Sarah stood near the fireplace, Ranger at her side. Across from her was indeed her handler, Connor, looking tense but not overtly threatening. But the second man, the one whose voice had seemed familiar, was Frank Collins, not Deputy Collins from the Sheriff's Department. Frank Collins, Mason's longtime friend from town. The same Frank who had checked on him after the storm. The Frank who knew about Ethan, about Mrs. Jensen, about everything. The betrayal hit Mason like a physical blow. Frank had been part of Ramirez's operation all along. His friend, his drinking buddy, the man who had helped him rebuild his deck after Emily died. Ranger sensed his presence, ears twitching slightly but giving no other indication. The dog's training was impeccable, maintaining cover until commanded otherwise. So where's this evidence you risked everything for? Connor was asking Sarah, holding out his hand. Sarah hesitated, her instincts clearly signaling caution. First, tell me why Frank Collins is here. He's not FBI, he's not even law enforcement. Frank laughed, the sound jarringly familiar to Mason. I'm what you might call an independent contractor. I provide certain services to certain people. He's DEA deep cover, Connor explained impatiently. Has been for years. Now the flash drive, Sarah. We need to move quickly. Something in Connor's explanation didn't ring true to Mason. The pieces weren't fitting. Frank Collins, a deep cover DEA agent. The same Frank who ran the local hardware store, who coached Little League, who'd lived in Pinewood his entire life. Sarah seemed to share his doubts. If he's DEA, where's his credentials? We don't exactly carry badges in deep cover, Frank replied smoothly. Connor can vouch for me. Connor can vouch for you, or you're vouching for Connor. Sarah's question hung in the air, sharp with suspicion. A tense silence followed, broken only by the soft crackling of the fireplace. Mason sensed the situation deteriorating rapidly. His hand moved to his weapon, preparing for what might come next. Enough games, Connor snapped finally. The flash drive, now. Sarah took a half step back, her hand drifting toward her concealed weapon. Something's not right here. The FBI task force was 3 people, you, Agent Morales, and Director Kellerman. Where are they? Delayed by the storm, Connor replied too quickly. Sarah, you're being paranoid. After what you've been through, it's understandable, but call them, Sarah interrupted. Right now, put them on speaker. Frank and Connor exchanged glances, a brief telling moment of communication that confirmed Mason's worst suspicions. These men weren't here to help Sarah. They were here to silence her and recover the evidence. Now, Sarah. Connor's hand moved inside his jacket. Mason made his decision. He stepped into the doorway, weapon raised. I wouldn't do that if I were you. All heads turned toward him, expressions ranging from shock to calculation. Ranger immediately moved to protective position beside Sarah, a low growl building in his chest. Mason Reynolds! Frank recovered first, smiling as if greeting an old friend at a barbecue. Should have known you'd be nearby. Always were the protective type. Hands where I can see them. Both of you. Mason kept his tone level, his aim unwavering. Connor complied slowly, revealing not a badge, but a silenced handgun half drawn from his shoulder holster. You're making a mistake, Reynolds. You have no idea what you've stumbled into. I know enough. Mason moved further into the room, positioning himself beside Sarah. I know Frank here isn't DEA. No deep cover agent, spends 20 years in one small town coaching Little League and running the hardware store. Frank's friendly facade fell away, replaced by cold calculation. You really think you know how this works? How deep these operations go? I've been building my cover since before you moved to Pinewood. And I suppose that cover required you to sell meth to high school kids, Sarah challenged. To launder money through your store, those aren't DEA tactics. Connor's expression hardened. Last chance. The flash drive and the laptop. Then you both walk away. We'll even throw in witness protection. Mason caught Sarah's eye, a silent communication passing between them. They were outnumbered but not outmatched. Ranger sensed the imminent conflict, muscles tensing in preparation. In some people enter your life by accident, Sarah said quietly. Others by design. The best ones stay by choice. The coded message was clear. She was choosing to stand with Mason rather than surrender the evidence. Whatever happened next, they would face it together. So that's how it's going to be. Frank sighed as if disappointed by poor customer service. Connor, I told you we should have just burned the cabin with them inside. Still an option, Connor replied coldly, his hand inching back toward his weapon. The situation balanced on a knife's edge, violence imminent. Outside, the wind picked up, whistling through the pines and rattling the cabin windows. In that moment of tension, a new sound cut through the night, the distinctive wail of police sirens growing rapidly louder. The approaching sirens shattered the tense standoff. Frank's head whipped toward the window, composure cracking. You called for backup. You said this location was secure. Connor's eyes never left Mason's. Not me. Ramirez must have found us. Mason kept his weapon trained on the 2 men, mind racing through tactical options. The cabin had limited exits, minimal cover, and they were outnumbered by 5. If Ramirez's deputies surrounded them, their position would become untenable within minutes. Back door. Now. Mason's directive to Sarah brooked no argument. Frank lunged for his weapon in the moment of distraction. Ranger reacted instantly, launching himself at the man with savage precision. Mason tackled Connor simultaneously, driving him to the floor before he could draw his silenced pistol. The cabin erupted into chaos, furniture, overturning glass, shattering as bodies collided. Sarah recovered Ramirez's laptop from where she'd set it, then made for the rear exit, covering Mason as he struggled with Connor. Ranger had Frank pinned, jaws locked around his forearm, preventing him from reaching his weapon. The man's face contorted in pain and fury, a stream of curses punctuating his attempts to dislodge the dog. Mason landed a solid blow to Connor's temple, momentarily stunning him. He scrambled to his feet, retrieving his weapon. Ranger, release. Let's move. The dog immediately disengaged, backing toward Mason while maintaining a defensive posture. Outside, the sirens grew louder, multiple vehicles converging on the cabin from different directions. The equipment shed 50 yards east, Sarah pointed, as they burst through the rear door into the bitter cold. It connects to the maintenance tunnels under the resort. They sprinted through knee-deep snow. Mason and Ranger breaking trail for Sarah. Behind them, shouts and flashlight beams cut through the darkness as Ramirez's men surrounded the cabin. The equipment shed loomed ahead, a large metal structure housing snowcats and grooming machines for the resort's ski slopes. Sarah tried the door locked as expected. Mason made quick work of the padlock with a pry bar from his tactical belt. Inside, the smell of diesel fuel and machinery grease filled the cavernous space. Massive snowcats and grooming vehicles created a maze of potential cover. Sarah moved confidently through the darkness, navigating by memory or instinct toward the rear of the building. Maintenance access should be here somewhere, she whispered, scanning the concrete floor with her flashlight. Mason spotted at first a large metal hatch partially concealed beneath a tarp. Together they lifted the heavy cover, revealing a ladder descending into darkness. "You first," Mason urged, keeping watch on the door. "Ranger and I will follow." Sarah descended quickly, the laptop secured in her jacket. Mason sent Ranger down next, the dog navigating the ladder with surprising agility. He followed last, pulling the hatch closed above them. Just as the equipment shed door burst open, flashlight beams sweeping across the space they'd occupied seconds earlier. The maintenance tunnel stretched before them, dimly lit by emergency bulbs spaced at wide intervals. Pipes and electrical conduits ran along the ceiling, occasionally dripping condensation that formed small icy puddles on the concrete floor. "These tunnels connect the entire resort," Sarah explained as they moved swiftly through the narrow passage. "Staff use them during bad weather to reach the outlying cabins without going outside." Mason checked his watch, nearly midnight. Above them, Ramirez and his men would be setting up a perimeter blocking roads, questioning resort staff. "Where does this lead?" "Main lodge eventually, but there's a maintenance exit that comes out near the employee parking area. If we can reach it unseen, we might be able to acquire transportation." A distant metallic clang echoed through the tunnel. Someone else had found the hatch. Mason urged them to greater speed. Ranger trotting ahead as point man ears pricked for danger. The tunnel forked, one branch continuing straight and the other veering left with a sign indicating Main Lodge. Sarah hesitated, considering their options. "They'll expect us to head for the main exit. Let's take the straight path. It leads to the water treatment facility. Less obvious." They pressed on, the sounds of pursuit growing fainter behind them. The straight tunnel descended gradually, the air growing damper and colder. After several hundred yards, they reached another junction, this one marked with fading paint, Pump House. Sarah pointed ahead. "That should lead outside near the base of the mountain. Less monitored than the main areas." A metal door blocked their path, secured with an electronic keypad. Sarah studied it, then entered a sequence of numbers. The light remained red. "Resort must have changed the maintenance codes," she muttered, trying another combination. Mason scanned their surroundings, looking for alternatives. "We don't have time for trial and error. They'll have this place locked down within minutes." The sound of boots on concrete echoed from behind them, pursuit drawing closer. Mason made a quick decision, drawing his knife and prying open the control panel beside the keypad. Inside, a tangle of wires connected to a simple circuit board. "Ranger guard," he commanded the dog, immediately taking up position facing the way they'd come. Mason studied the wiring for a moment, then selected two, a red and a green cutting, and crossing them. The door mechanism clicked, the lock disengaging. "Special Forces training includes electronic security bypass," he explained at Sarah's surprised expression, "among other useful skills." They pushed through the door into a small pump house. Industrial equipment hummed around them, maintaining water pressure for the resort's snowmaking system. A single exterior door offered escape to the outside world. Mason peered through a small window. The pump house stood at the edge of a service road, currently deserted. Beyond it, the employee parking lot contained several vehicles, dimly visible through gently falling snow. "Clear for now, but they'll have patrols searching." Mason checked his weapon. "We make for the parking lot, find a vehicle, and get off this mountain before they can lock down the access roads." Sarah nodded, clutching Ramirez's laptop like a lifeline. "The evidence on this plus what's on the flash drive, it's everything we need. Names, dates, bank accounts. Not just Ramirez and his local operation, but their connections to distributors in Denver, Chicago, even international suppliers. Which is exactly why they're willing to kill for it." Mason peered outside again, surveying the terrain. "Ready?" Sarah squared her shoulders, the determination in her eyes matching his own. "Lead the way." They slipped out into the biting cold, Ranger moving silently between them. The service road provided minimal cover, just occasional snowbanks from plowing and scattered maintenance equipment. They moved in short bursts using the falling snow for additional concealment. The employee parking lot contained about 20 vehicles, mostly older model sedans and SUVs with local plates. Mason selected a nondescript Jeep Cherokee positioned for quick exit. "Cover me," he instructed, approaching the vehicle while Sarah and Ranger kept watch. The Jeep's door was locked as expected. Mason broke the small rear window with his elbow, then reached in to unlock the driver's door. Within seconds, he had the steering column open, working to hotwire the ignition. Headlights suddenly swept across the parking lot as a sheriff's department SUV turned onto the service road, moving slowly as officers scanned the area. Sarah and Ranger ducked behind a snowbank out of the direct line of sight. Mason continued working, fingers moving by touch and memory. The patrol vehicle cruised slowly past their position, its spotlight illuminating each parked car in turn. Just as the beam approached the Jeep, the engine rumbled to life. "Now, Minna," Mason called, throwing the vehicle into gear as Sarah and Ranger sprinted from cover. They piled in as Mason floored the accelerator, tires spinning on the icy pavement before finding purchase. The patrol car's spotlight swung toward them, followed immediately by the wail of sirens and flash of emergency lights. Mason drove with controlled aggression, navigating the twisting service road with the skill of someone intimately familiar with mountain driving. Behind them, the patrol car gave chase, soon joined by a second vehicle emerging from a side road. "They're trying to box us in before we reach the main access road," Sarah observed, checking her weapon. Mason nodded grimly. "Two options: outrun them or find somewhere to make a stand until your FBI backup arrives." "If they arrive." Sarah's doubt was evident. "Connor was my handler. If he's compromised, who else might be?" The main access road appeared ahead, a two-lane highway winding down the mountainside. Mason took the turn at speed, the Jeep sliding sideways before straightening. Their pursuers were closing the gap now, joined by a third vehicle. "Call your backup contact," Mason urged. "Someone higher up the chain. Director Kellerman, you mentioned." Sarah pulled out her phone, dialing a number from memory. No signal. "They might be jamming communications." Mason checked the rearview mirror. Their pursuers were gaining ground on the straighter sections of road. "We can't outrun them all the way to Denver. We need a defensive position." An idea formed as they rounded a curve, revealing the vast, moonlit expanse of Pine Valley below. "There's an old fire watchtower about 3 miles ahead. Defensible, clear lines of sight. We make our stand there." Sarah nodded in agreement, understanding the tactical advantages. "How much ammo do you have?" "2 full magazines plus what's loaded." "Soon?" "Similar, plus whatever Ranger contributes." She glanced at the boy who sat alertly in the back seat, body tensed for action. Mason took a sudden turn onto a narrow forest road, catching their pursuers by surprise. The unmarked route was barely visible, snow-covered and unplowed, but Mason navigated it with confidence born of local knowledge. "They won't expect this route," he explained. "It's not on most maps, old logging road that connects to the fire tower access path." The Jeep struggled through deepening snow, its four-wheel drive system working at maximum capacity. Behind them, the first sheriff's vehicle attempted to follow, but became stuck in a drift, its more street-oriented tires spinning uselessly. The others would find alternate routes, but they'd bought precious minutes. The forest road climbed steadily, switchbacking up the mountainside. After about 2 miles, Mason stopped the Jeep in a small clearing. "We go on foot from here. Less than a mile to the tower, but the road gets impassable." They gathered their equipment quickly: weapons, ammunition, the crucial laptop and flash drive. Mason retrieved a first aid kit and emergency supplies from his go bag, distributing the weight between them. "Ranger Scout," he commanded, and the dog moved ahead, breaking trail through the deep snow. They hiked in silence, the only sound their labored breathing and the crunch of snow beneath their boots. The night had cleared, stars blazing overhead in the crisp mountain air. Under different circumstances, it would have been breathtakingly beautiful. The fire watchtower appeared through the trees, a tall wooden structure rising above the surrounding pines. Its elevated cabin, perched atop a framework of sturdy timbers, offered 360-degree visibility of the surrounding terrain. A perfect defensive position. Mason led them up the steep staircase, wincing at each creak of aged wood. The cabin itself was small but solid, windows on all sides, allowing unobstructed views of the approaches. A basic emergency radio sat on a dusty counter alongside topographic maps of the surrounding wilderness. "No electricity, but there should be a backup generator." Mason located the small propane generator beneath the main console, checking its fuel level. Half tank. Enough for a few hours if we need communications. Sarah moved to the windows, surveying the terrain they traversed. No headlights were visible yet, but she knew it was only a matter of time. Radio first, she decided, turning to the ancient equipment. If we can reach outside help, we might not need to fight. Mason started the generator, its low hum filling the small cabin. The radio console lit up, and Sarah quickly tuned it to an emergency frequency. This is FBI Special Agent Sarah Mitchell requesting immediate assistance. Authentication code, Sierra Mike 247 Tango. We are under attack by corrupt law enforcement at the Pine Ridge Fire Watchtower coordinates. She read the latitude and longitude from the map on the wall. Static answered her call. She tried again, adjusting frequencies, attempting different channels. Still nothing but atmospheric noise. Signal might not reach through these mountains, Mason suggested. Or they could be jamming communications. For me, Sarah's frustration was palpable. Without backup, we're just prolonging the inevitable. They have more men, more resources. We have the high ground, limited approaches, and the element of surprise. Mason checked his weapon methodically. And we have something worth fighting for. A faint light appeared through the tree's headlights on the main forest road below. Ramirez's men had found an alternate route and were converging on their position. Here they come, Sarah confirmed, counting the vehicles. 3 SUVs, at least 6 men, probably more. Mason positioned himself at the north-facing window, rifle ready. They'll establish a perimeter first, try to determine if we're actually here. Then they'll attempt communication, try to lure us out peacefully. And when that fails, direct assault. They can't afford to wait us out too many questions if this drags into daylight hours with resort guests and staff as potential witnesses. The first vehicle stopped about 100 yards from the tower-based headlights, illuminating the snow-covered clearing. 2 more SUVs pulled in behind it, positioning to prevent escape down the road. Through binoculars, Mason identified Sheriff Ramirez emerging from the lead vehicle, accompanied by Deputies Collins and Davis. Several other men spread out, taking cover behind vehicles and trees, all heavily armed. Ramirez is down there, Mason reported, along with at least 7 deputies. They're setting up a standard containment formation. A spotlight suddenly blazed to life, its beams sweeping up to illuminate the tower cabin. A voice boomed through a megaphone, distorted but recognizable as Ramirez. Mitchell Reynolds, we know you're up there. You have nowhere to go. Surrender now and no one needs to get hurt. Sarah moved to the opposite window, keeping low to avoid presenting a target. What's our play? Mason considered their options, weighing tactical advantages against the overwhelming force below. We hold position. Make them come to us. Each step up that staircase puts them at a disadvantage. Ramirez's voice came again, tone shifting from authoritative to reasonable. Let's talk this through like professionals. Whatever you think you know, whatever evidence you think you have, we can work something out. But this ends tonight one way or another. Sarah checked her weapon again, a calming ritual amidst the escalating tension. He's trying to buy time, position his men for an assault. Agreed. Mason scanned the perimeter, noting the deputies' movements. They're spreading out, looking for alternate approaches. Standard encirclement tactic. The radio suddenly crackled to life, startling them both. A voice emerged through the static, female, authoritative. This is FBI Assistant Director Elena Vasquez, responding to emergency transmission. Agent Mitchell, if you can hear this, authenticate your status. Sarah lunged for the radio, hope flaring in her eyes. Authentication code Sierra Mike 247 Tango. We are under siege by Sheriff Dominic Ramirez and deputies at the Pine Ridge Fire Watchtower. Ramirez is running a multi-state drug trafficking operation. We have evidence on a laptop and flash drive. The radio crackled again. Authentication confirmed. We've been searching for you since the crash, Agent Mitchell. Your handler, Connor Walsh, missed his check-in 8 hours ago. What's his status? Sarah's expression darkened. Compromised. He attempted to retrieve the evidence and eliminate witnesses. Currently at Blackwater Ridge, Cabin 17, with an accomplice named Frank Collins. Understood. FBI tactical team is mobilizing from Denver field office. Estimated arrival at your location 1 hour. Can you hold position? Mason took the radio. This is Mason Reynolds, former Staff Sergeant, 5th Special Forces. We're facing at least 8 hostiles heavily armed. They're preparing for assault now. 1 hour might be too long. Copy that, Staff Sergeant. Local Colorado State Patrol has been notified, but will take approximately 40 minutes to reach your location due to weather conditions. Hold if possible. Authorization for defensive force granted. The transmission ended, leaving them in momentary silence. Outside, Ramirez's men continued their encirclement, unaware of the approaching federal response. "We need to buy time," Sarah stated the obvious. "Keep them talking, delay any assault." Mason nodded, formulating a strategy. "I'll take the radio, respond to Ramirez. You cover the southern approach, that's their most likely angle of attack. Ranger can alert us to any attempts to flank from the east or west." Sarah positioned herself at the southern window as Mason retrieved the megaphone from the emergency kit. "Ramirez, well," he called out, voice amplified across the clearing. "This is Reynolds. We're willing to talk, but everyone stays where they are." Below, Ramirez emerged from behind his vehicle, hands spread in a show of reasonableness. "Just me, Reynolds. I'm coming up, unarmed." "Negative, you stay put. We talk from here." Ranger suddenly growled, moving to the western window. Sarah shifted position to investigate spotting movement among the trees, deputies attempting to circle behind the tower. "West side," she whispered. "Two men moving into flanking position." Mason acknowledged with a nod, continuing his dialogue with Ramirez. "What exactly are you proposing, Sheriff?" "Simple exchange. The evidence for your lives. You walk away, relocate somewhere warm with new identities." This never happened. While maintaining the conversation, Mason quietly loaded a flare gun from the emergency kit. He handed it to Sarah with a meaningful glance toward the flanking deputies. Sarah understood immediately. She aimed through the window and fired the flare, arcing through the darkness to land directly in the path of the approaching men. The forest floor illuminated in harsh red light, exposing their position completely. Ramirez's facade of negotiation evaporated. "Take them down," he bellowed, ducking behind his vehicle as his deputies opened fire. Bullets splintered the wooden walls of the tower cabin, forcing Mason and Sarah to drop to the floor. Ranger flattened himself beside them, trained to respond to gunfire. "So much for buying time," Sarah muttered, crawling to a firing position beneath a window. Mason moved to the opposite side, setting up a crossfire. "We don't need to win. We just need to not lose for the next hour." The initial volley subsided, deputies conserving ammunition while awaiting orders. Mason used the opportunity to assess damage to the cabin, multiple bullet holes, but no structural compromise yet. "They'll try the stairs next," he predicted. "Direct assault, while the rest provide covering fire." As if on cue, 3 deputies broke from cover, sprinting toward the tower base. Sarah and Mason opened fire simultaneously, their coordinated shots forcing the attackers back to safety. "They'll try again," Sarah warned, reloading. "With better cover fire next time." Mason checked his watch, 53 minutes until potential FBI arrival. An eternity in a firefight. The radio crackled again. "Agent Mitchell, this is Assistant Director Vasquez. State Patrol has engaged Connor Walsh and Frank Collins at Blackwater Ridge. Evidence secured from cabin 17. New ETA for your location, 35 minutes. Sarah acknowledged the transmission, hope renewing her determination. "We just need to hold on a little longer." Below, Ramirez had gathered his deputies for a strategic huddle. Mason didn't like the implications. They were planning something more coordinated than the previous attempt. "They're getting desperate," he observed. "Knowing State Patrol is already in the area changes their timeline. They need to eliminate us and any evidence before reinforcements arrive." Sarah checked the laptop, ensuring it remained undamaged. "This goes way beyond Ramirez. The names in here are judges, state officials, even federal agents. Connor was just the tip of the iceberg." A new sound reached them, the distinctive crack of a high-powered rifle, followed by the splintering of wood directly beside Mason's position. He ducked instinctively. "Sniper," he warned. They brought in a marksman. The shot had come from the eastern ridge, approximately 300 yards away, optimal range for a trained shooter with the right equipment. The elevated position negated much of their tower advantage. "We need to neutralize that sniper," Sarah stated, already calculating angles and approaches. Mason studied the terrain through his binoculars, locating a small outcropping that would provide the ideal sniper nest. "I see him. Eastern ridge, using a boulder for cover. Too far for accurate pistol fire." Another shot punched through the cabin wall, this one lower, the sniper walking his fire toward their likely positions. Sarah moved away from the windows, retreating to the cabin's center, where support beams provided additional protection. Ideas, she asked, mind racing through tactical options. Mason considered their limited resources, one eyes falling on the emergency flare kit. Diversion. We use the remaining flares to temporarily blind the sniper, then make a strategic repositioning. Repositioning where we're trapped in this tower. Not necessarily. Mason moved to the floor hatch they'd used to enter the cabin. There's a maintenance platform beneath us used for structural repairs. If we can reach it unseen, we might be able to circle around and approach from an unexpected direction. The sniper fired again, the bullet passing through the cabin at knee height. They were running out of time. Ranger stays here, Mason decided. He'll create the impression we're still in position while we flank. Sarah nodded, understanding the strategy. The dog as decoy while we circle around. Classic Special Forces tactic. Something like that. Mason checked his remaining ammunition, less than ideal for an extended engagement. We'll need to be selective with our shots. Make each one count. They prepared quickly, Mason gathering the remaining flares while Sarah left her jacket draped over a chair, creating a human-shaped silhouette visible from outside. Ranger watched them intently, seeming to understand his role in the plan. Ranger, stay, Mason commanded firmly. Guard. The dog settled into position, intelligent eyes fixed on Mason with complete trust. Sarah felt a lump form in her throat at the bond between man and animal, a partnership forged through shared trauma and mutual respect. Mason opened the floor hatch, revealing the narrow maintenance platform below. On my signal, fire 2 flares toward the sniper position, then follow me down. Sarah positioned herself by the eastern window, flare gun ready. Mason counted down silently, 3, 2, 1, then nodded. Sarah fired in quick succession, 2 brilliant red flares arcing toward the sniper's position. The momentary flash would disrupt his night vision, forcing him to reposition or wait for his eyes to readjust. They dropped through the hatch onto the maintenance platform as a hail of covering fire from Ramirez's deputies peppered the cabin above. Ranger remained in position, occasionally moving between windows to maintain the illusion of human defenders. The platform circled the entire cabin, providing a narrow walkway with minimal railing. They moved cautiously, staying low to avoid detection from below. The cold metal beneath their hands had accumulated a thin layer of ice, making each movement treacherous. East side, Mason whispered, indicating their target direction. We work our way down, using the support structure, then circle through the trees to flank the sniper. The descent was harrowing, climbing down the tower's crossbeams in near darkness, fingers numbing in the bitter cold. One slip meant a 30-foot fall onto frozen ground. They moved methodically, testing each handhold before committing their weight. Above the sporadic exchange of gunfire continued Ramirez's men firing at the cabin, while Ranger moved between positions, creating the impression of active defenders. They reached the ground on the tower's eastern side, concealed from the main force by the structure itself. Mason oriented himself, then pointed toward a dense stand of pines that would provide cover for their approach to the sniper's position. They moved through the forest like shadows, years of training evident in their silent progress. The snow hampered speed but muffled sound, allowing them to advance undetected despite the open terrain. The sniper's position came into view, a natural rock formation, providing both elevation and cover. The marksman lay, prone, rifle trained on the tower cabin, unaware of the threat approaching his flank. Mason signaled their approach. Sarah would circle left while he took the right, creating a pincer movement that would leave the sniper no escape route. They separated, each choosing their path through the underbrush with careful precision. Sarah reached her position, first identifying the sniper as Deputy Davis, the same man who had interrogated her at the station. Mason appeared on the opposite side moments later, giving the signal to advance. They converged simultaneously, weapons trained on the unsuspecting deputy. Drop the rifle. Hands where I can see them. Mason's command left no room for misinterpretation. Davis froze, then slowly raised his hands from the rifle. Reynolds, should have known you'd try something like this. On your stomach, hands behind your back. Sarah directed, maintaining her aim at his center mass. The deputy complied, though his expression remained defiant. You really think this changes anything? You're still outnumbered. Mason secured Davis with his remaining zip ties, then confiscated the sniper rifle, a Remington 700 with tactical scope and suppressor. This evens the odds a bit. Sarah checked her watch, 23 minutes until FBI arrival. We need to get back to the tower. Ranger can't hold them off forever. A sudden increase in gunfire from the direction of the tower confirmed her concern. Through the trees, they could see Ramirez's men making a coordinated push toward the stairs, heavy covering fire suppressing any response from above. "They're making their move," Mason observed, checking the rifle's ammunition. 8 rounds in the magazine, plus 1 in the chamber. Not enough to engage them all. Sarah considered their options, eyes falling on the sheriff's vehicles parked at the tower's base. "We don't need to engage them all, just create enough chaos to disrupt their assault." Mason followed her gaze, understanding immediately. "The vehicles. Take out their transportation, they'll have to pull back and reassess." "Exactly. A few well-placed shots to the engine blocks and fuel tanks. No escape route, no assault." Mason nodded, shifting position to establish a firing line with clear sight of the parked SUVs. He settled into a proper shooting stance, controlling his breathing as he had been trained to do in countless combat situations. The first shot struck the lead vehicle's engine block, a precision hit that sent steam billowing into the frozen air. The second punctured a fuel tank, gasoline spilling onto the snow beneath. 3 more carefully placed shots disabled the remaining vehicles. The effect was immediate and dramatic. Deputies scattered from their assault positions, returning to defensive cover as they tried to identify the new threat. Ramirez shouted orders, attempting to regain control of his disintegrating attack force. "Now for the finale," Mason murmured, aiming at the pool of spilled gasoline. The shot ignited the fuel flames, erupting in a spectacular bloom that illuminated the entire clearing. In the sudden light, Ramirez and his men were completely exposed, their positions revealed to anyone within miles. "That should keep them occupied," Sarah observed with grim satisfaction, "and serve as a nice beacon for the FBI tactical team." They used the distraction to circle back toward the tower, approaching from the rear where deputies had abandoned their positions to deal with the burning vehicles. Ranger greeted them at the base with an enthusiastic but quiet reunion, having descended once he sensed their return. "Good boy," Mason praised, checking the dog for injuries. "Mission accomplished." They retreated to defensive positions behind the tower, watching as Ramirez's operation disintegrated into chaos. Some deputies were attempting to extinguish the burning vehicles, while others maintained a perimeter, unsure where the next attack might come from. Sarah checked her phone, finally a signal now that they were away from the tower's interference. "I'm calling Assistant Director Vasquez, confirming our position." While she made the call, Mason kept watch on the increasingly desperate situation before them. Ramirez stood in the clearing, shouting at his men, his authority crumbling with each passing minute. "FBI is 10 minutes out," Sarah reported after completing her call. "State Patrol even closer, they're approaching from the North Access Road." Mason nodded relief, tempering his vigilance. "We just need to stay hidden until they arrive. No need to engage further." A sudden movement caught his attention, Ramirez breaking away from the group, heading directly toward the forest where they had taken cover. The sheriff moved with purpose, weapon drawn, following what appeared to be tracks in the snow. "He's found our trail," Mason warned, shifting to a better position. "Coming this way." Sarah readied her weapon, but Mason placed a restraining hand on her arm. "No, he's mine." Before she could protest, Mason advanced through the trees, intercepting Ramirez's path. Ranger followed silently, understanding the hunt. Sheriff Ramirez moved with the confidence of a man accustomed to being the predator rather than the prey. His focus on the tracks before him left him oblivious to Mason's approach until it was too late. "That's far enough, Ramirez." Mason emerged from the shadows, rifle trained on the sheriff's chest. Ramirez froze, then slowly raised his hands, pistol still clutched in his right. "Reynolds, I underestimated you from the beginning. Should have dealt with you when I had the chance." "Drop the weapon." Ramirez's smile was cold, calculating. "You know I can't do that. Too much at stake." Mason recognized the look in the sheriff's eyes, a man preparing to gamble everything on one desperate move. "Don't do it. Not worth dying for." "Some things are worth dying for. Others are worth killing for." Ramirez's muscles tensed, preparing to bring his weapon to bear. Ranger growled low, emerging from the underbrush beside Mason, teeth bared in recognition of his former partner's killer. The dog's presence seemed to unnerve Ramirez more than the rifle aimed at his heart. "That mutt," Ramirez's voice betrayed his first hint of uncertainty. "Should have put him down after Mitchell's accident." "Not an accident," Mason corrected. "Murder, just like you're contemplating right now. Last chance to drop the weapon." Time seemed to slow as Ramirez made his choice, beginning to pivot his pistol toward Mason. Before either man could fire, Ranger launched forward with explosive force, a furious mass of muscle and teeth targeting Ramirez's gun arm. The sheriff screamed as powerful jaws clamped onto his wrist, the pistol discharging harmlessly into the snow as Ranger drove him to the ground. Mason closed the distance quickly, kicking the fallen weapon away and placing his boot firmly on Ramirez's chest. Courage isn't about not being afraid, Mason observed, looking down at the man who had brought so much suffering. It's about what you do while you're terrified. Ranger maintained his hold until Mason commanded his release, the dog backing away, but remaining vigilant, his mission finally complete justice for his fallen partner. In the distance, sirens wailed as state patrol vehicles approached from the North Access Road. The nightmare was nearly over. Mason secured Ramirez with the sheriff's own handcuffs, then marched him back toward the clearing where Sarah waited. Her expression as she saw Ramirez in custody, defeated, bleeding, humiliated, held the vindication of 2 years' relentless pursuit. Michael would be proud, she said simply, voice thick with emotion. The next hours passed in a blur of activity. State Patrol officers secured the scene and detained Ramirez's remaining deputies. FBI tactical teams arrived shortly after establishing a perimeter and collecting evidence. Sarah handed over Ramirez's laptop and the flash drive, recounting the entire operation to increasingly senior officials as they arrived. Mason found himself giving his own statement to an FBI agent, explaining his involvement from finding Sarah in the crashed cruiser to the final confrontation with Ramirez. Ranger remained by his side throughout, receiving admiring glances from law enforcement officers who recognized a working K-9 when they saw one. Dawn was breaking over the mountains when Assistant Director Vasquez approached them, her expression serious but respectful. "Mr. Reynolds, on behalf of the Bureau, I want to thank you for your assistance in this operation. Without your intervention, Agent Mitchell would likely not have survived, and years of investigative work would have been lost." Mason nodded, too exhausted for formalities. "What happens now?" "Ramirez and his network will face federal prosecution. The evidence Agent Mitchell secured implicates officials at multiple levels of government and law enforcement. This will be a complex case, but a solid one. And Connor Frank Collins, both in custody. Connor Walsh has already started negotiating, offering information on higher-level connections in exchange for considerations. As for your safety," Mason interrupted, mind turning to more immediate concerns. "My son, I need to get back to him." "Of course. We've already dispatched agents to secure your home and ensure your son's safety." Mrs. Jensen confirmed they're both fine. Relief washed through Mason, the weight of the past 24 hours suddenly crashing down upon him. Sarah appeared at his side, her own debriefing apparently complete. "They're offering witness protection," she informed him quietly. "For both of us, new identities, relocation, the works." Mason looked out over the snow-covered valley, the place he'd called home since returning from his final deployment. The garage he'd built from nothing after Emily's death. The life he and Ethan had created together. "I don't know if I can leave. Start over again. Ethan's already lost so much." Sarah's hand found his, a tentative connection in the midst of uncertainty. "You don't have to decide now. There are other options we can discuss." Ranger pressed against Mason's leg, a solid, warm presence grounding him in the moment. The dog who had lost everything found a temporary home, then reunited with his past, a living bridge between what was and what could be. 3 months later, Mason stood on his newly rebuilt deck, watching Ranger race through fresh spring snow with Ethan. The winter's scars were healing, new growth emerging from beneath the melting drifts. His garage had reopened, business steady despite, or perhaps because of his brief notoriety as the mechanic who helped bring down a corrupt sheriff. He declined witness protection, choosing instead to stay and face whatever came. The FBI had installed security systems, run background checks on his employees, and maintained a discreet presence in Pinewood during the initial phases of the Ramirez prosecution. But life had gradually returned to a new normal. Sarah's SUV appeared on the long driveway, right on schedule for her weekend visit from Denver. After testifying at the preliminary hearings, she'd accepted a permanent position with the FBI's Denver field office, close enough for regular visits, far enough to maintain her professional independence. Ranger spotted her vehicle before anyone else, ears perking up, as he abandoned his play session with Ethan to race down the driveway. By the time Sarah parked, the dog was dancing in circles around her door tail, wagging with unrestrained joy. Mason watched from the deck as Sarah greeted Ranger, then Ethan, the three of them making their way up to the house together. Something warm unfurled in his chest at the sight of feeling he'd thought lost forever after Emily died. "Good timing," he called as they approached. "Steaks are almost ready." Sarah climbed the steps, snowflakes melting in her dark hair. She looked different now, the haunted intensity replaced by something calmer, more settled. Justice had brought healing for all of them. "How's the new position?" Mason asked as they moved inside to escape the evening chill. "Challenging, rewarding. Director Vasquez has me heading a new task force investigating corruption in law enforcement. Seems I have some experience in that area." Their conversation flowed easily through dinner, Ethan dominating much of it with stories from school and detailed explanations of his latest Lego creations. Ranger moved between them during the meal, accepting occasional bites from all three humans with diplomatic impartiality. Later, after Ethan had gone to bed, Mason and Sarah stood on the deck watching stars emerge above the pine forest. The comfortable silence between them spoke of shared experiences that words couldn't fully capture. 6 months since the storm, Sarah observed finally. Sometimes it feels like yesterday, other times like another lifetime. Mason nodded, understanding completely. "Ramirez's trial starts next month. Are you ready?" "As ready as I'll ever be. My testimony is solid and the evidence is overwhelming." She paused, then added, "They offered Michael a formal posthumous commendation. Ceremonies next week in Denver. You should be proud. He'd be proud of what you accomplished." Sarah's eyes glistened in the moonlight. "I couldn't have done it without you, without Ranger." The dog appeared at the mention of his name, pressing between them with perfect timing. They both laughed, tension broken by his insistent presence. "A good dog knows his home isn't just a place," Mason observed, watching Ranger's contented expression as Sarah scratched behind his ears. "It's wherever his people are." Sarah's hand found Mason's fingers, intertwining naturally. "Ethan asked me earlier if I was staying this time." Mason's heart quickened. "What did you tell him?" "That I'd talk to his dad about it." Their eyes met, the question hovering between them. Mason thought of the journey that had brought them together: a crashed police cruiser, a traumatized dog, a corrupt sheriff. Out of danger and loss had come something unexpected, something worth protecting. "Some people enter your life by accident," he said softly. "Others by design. The best ones stay by choice." Sarah's smile held all the answer he needed. Behind them, Bar Elk Creek Bridge stood repaired against the moonlit landscape, no longer a place of discovery, but a connection between past and future. Inside, Ethan slept peacefully, secure in the knowledge that his family, unconventional as it might be, was finally complete. And at their feet, Ranger rested with the contentment of a dog who had fulfilled his mission, found his people, and come home at last.